all your wedges cut, it's time to sew. So the way we do that is we remove our clip, and the basting I had, or the tagging plastic that was on here, has been removed or isn't there. So if you have basting there, you should remove that. And then you are going to take each wedge only in one stack. This is not a thing where you take all your wedges and stack them up and do them all at one time. You take one stack of wedges and you are going to fold them in half lengthwise, and you're going to match up those raw edges, right sides together, and you're going to press. And as I press, I set mine aside, and then I grab my next one, and then I press the whole stack of 12, and I kind of fan them out as I'm stacking them. And the cool thing is as I fan them out, I kind of get a little bit of a look of how my medallion is going to look. If you're taking our class here at Anything Sews, we usually have taken a break, half-hour break for lunch. After we get all our cutting done, all our wedges are cut, and we're ready to sew. So I've got all these pressed, and I am going to turn them and lay them down so that the folded side of what I pressed is to the right. The fold needs to be away from me, not to the right. And so I'm going to put that fold in first and line up my 1/4 inch. And we're going to assembly line sew. There is no need for us to stop or to cut in between, and we want to leave about a 1/2 inch of thread in between each one. So you'll see here I have about a 1/2 inch before I start the next one. And we are sewing across the top. So the short side, I am sewing from the fold out to the raw edge on the other side. Okay, when I get to the end, if I was going to sew a bunch of medallions together, I would stop here, and this is how it should look. It should look like you've got them hanging on a clothesline to dry, and it's best if you leave these all together in this strip until you are ready to complete sewing, complete your medallion sewing. Because we're doing this video, I am going to cut these apart right away and continue in showing you the process. But I might have a whole basket of these, but leaving them together like this, make sure that the 12 that are in this stack of wedges stays together so that the medallion turns out the way you want it. And so at this point I can cut them apart, and when I'm doing a lot of these, I like to use this gizmo. It's called the cutting gizmo, and what it allows me to do is it allows me to just snip these really fast like this. You know, so saves those carpal tunnel issues. Not to mention it's fast and quick. So anytime I do any type of assembly line sewing, I use this gizmo to do that. Okay, so now that I have these sewn together, now they need to be put right side out. And so I would stick your thumb inside, you know, where you've sewn into that point, and you are going to finger press first. So not your thumb, I'm sorry, this is where your finger goes in. Your finger goes in and you do a finger press of that seam you just sewed. Then stick your thumb in and turn it right side out. Okay, now I could do the whole strip, but I'm just going to show you the whole process. Then I use some type of point turner, my favorite one right here, and I push that point out so I get a nice point there. Then we are going to fold this down so that that folded line I pressed to begin with on that one side, that seam now gets folded to that fold line, and you press only the top part. Do not press further down, just do the top part there. And so this is what you end up having after you've pressed, and I'm going to do that with my whole stack. I'm going to do the finger pressing first. And actually with my finger in there, I could just keep in one motion so I don't have to take it out, put it back in again. Is do my turning right side out. I know that also sometimes when you sew something like this and you've got this edge right here that you have a tendency to want to clip that point. You do not want to do that. You do not need to clip that point. It will lay really nice and flat for you if you've sewn it correctly. Full quarter inch seam. You'll find it printed in the book that way a lot. Full quarter inch seam. I can show you a medallion that was made that didn't have the correct seam. It was either too much or too little, and it gets all bowed up. If you are sewing the correct seam, they lay nice and flat. You should be careful with your point turner because you could actually push it through your fabric. So it's a gentle nudging of the point turner and just to get a nice point. Okay, again, just a reminder, you are putting it so that seam you sewed meets up with the fold that you first did on the length, and you were only pressing the very top part. You want to keep the rest of that fold, and I'll show you why in just a moment here. So now that I have this stack all pressed and ready to go, it's time to start building our medallion. And our medallion, you're taking 2 of the medallions, or 2 of the wedges, and you're putting them right sides together, and you want to match these folded edges up here at the top where you've just pressed. It's advisable to put a couple of pins. Thank you. Advisable to put like a pin here where you're going to start. And what you're doing is you are going to put a back stitch in here. You know, we don't do a lot of back stitching in quilting because we have all those intersecting seams and we sew over them and over them. But here, we want you to do a back stitch because we don't want that to come out, you know, some other time. So just a you know, stitch or 2 is all you need. And then if your seam is, if the size seam is correct, as I come down here, I should end right at the fold that we have right down the center here. So I've got that on my 1/4 inch mark. I am sewing. And I have ended right at that, right at the fold, right there. Okay, now I stopped that just so that I could show you how I ended at the fold. Here I would do more assembly line sewing, where I would pin. I might pin all 6 because you're putting 2 together and matching up where those folds are. Another way that you can do this, maybe you don't like the tail of a back stitch sticking out up there, and on this one I'll show you another way that you can do that so that you don't have a tail sticking out when you do back stitching. It is a little more work, but sometimes it's worth it, because this folded edge is part of, you know, what you see for your applique. So what you can do is, instead of putting it in this way, you're going to put it in the other way, and you're not going to sew from the bottom up. What you're going to do is you're going to decide how much of a back stitch area you're going to have, and you're going to sew to the end. Don't cut the thread, pivot around. And my machine has that same 1/4 inch on the other side. And I'm just going to go back over that stitching. And now I don't have a tail sticking out on this side, so it can give you a cleaner valley there in your medallion. So that's just another way, you know, just to show you the difference. This one has the tail, so that's going to be snipped. There's always a tiny bit of the thread that still sticks out from that side, and here it's hidden, it's gotten caught up in my seam. So your choice how you want to do that. And if you're worried about sewing to the left, I can put it on this side, this way. So to the end, pivot, and sew all the way down. As you can see, I'm not a pinner. I am pinning for your benefit, not mine. Again, you want to make sure that those are ending on that fold line. If not, check to see where your 1/4 inch should be. Okay, so once we get to the end of our twos, where we're putting two of our wedges together, I can't emphasize enough, do not press any of your seams yet. Now typically we are used to sewing a seam, pressing, sewing a seam, pressing. You do not want to do this, and when we get to the end of putting these all together, I will show you why, why we wait. Okay, so now I have 6 sets of 2s done, so 6 2 together. This is starting to give you an idea of how this medallion is coming together. If we were just to lay these down and get a quick little idea. But what's really cool is just to sew them all together and don't look ahead of time and be surprised, when you do it. So now I'm going to put 2 sets of 2 together, and I'll end up with 3 sets of 4. And we're going to do the same thing. We are going to do a back stitch, pin if you want, now I have 3 sets of 4. Okay, and you might have a tendency to think that you're gonna have 2 sets, to have 2 sets of 6. We highly suggest you do not. We find that having 2 sets of 6, when you fold them, when you put them together, they don't always match up nicely, and sometimes you can really see that center seam. So we suggest that you put the 2 sets of 4 together, just like we've been doing the other sets, your set of 2s and your set of 4s. Now we're going to put 2 4s together. Still do not press any seams yet. So now I have 2 sets of 4. Now I'm going to put this other set of 4 here. And we are still back stitching at the beginning, sewing down. The other down the long edge. And now I'm left with my final seam. Okay, so I have, you know, it just is continuing all the way around. All 12 now are connected, but I'm going to connect the last final seam so that all 12 will now be in a medallion. And then you do the reveal. I've been giving you a sneak peek as I've sewn. Normally wouldn't do that. You would just keep it, you know, all laid down. And I can tell that it's, once I press it, it should be flat. Okay, and so we're going to go over to the ironing board, and this is where we take and lay it down, and you start somewhere, anywhere that's comfortable, and you start pressing all of your seams. You just go around, press your seams all in the same direction, going around into that spiral. And it looks, nope, it's there. And so here's the reveal. When I turn it over, you'll see how we have all 12 medallions sewn together, barely an opening in the center. You know, and we could fussy cut a round circle in there, or whatever we did. Lots of people will use whatever background color they used for their appliquing. They might, you know, they might use, let's just say that you picked up this blue as the background. Then you could do a blue yo-yo, or just a round circle that you turn under 1/4 of an inch, so that, you know, you're going to put that in there. Cinda's bringing one over here, one of the larger or previous medallion that was done, and this is not, yes it is, it feels like it might be a yo-yo. And then I used the blanket stitch on my machine to stitch it down, and so it just kind of becomes part of that fabric in that medallion.
When you are pressing this flat, if you have some sort of like best press or some of those spray starches, or just plain steam, that helps to set it so it will stay flat.
Now this, you'll see how flat this was, and we don't have any steam. Right. This could be a steam iron, but we have no water in it, and it pressed it nice and flat. So I ended up using, evidently, an almost perfect, unusually, perfect 1/4 inch seam, you know, so that it ended up turning out that way. And so I'm going to sew a few more together, and we'll get some more pictures. And Cinda is sewing hers so that you'll get an idea of what Cinda's looks like with her different fabric as we go along here.